Good evening and welcome. I'm John Harry. I'm the Executive Director of the Portage County Historical Society. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's virtual program, the History of Goerke Park. We're going to go over a lot of stuff tonight, a lot of great pictures, a lot of great stories. And as we're building our audience here, as people are tuning in, I just want to let everybody know that we do have some events coming up, more to be announced as well. I'm going to throw a couple links into the chat. If you want to stay up to date with what the Historical Society is doing, go ahead and sign up for our mailing list. That should go, there we go, in the chat. And then I'm going to post another link right now, but we're going to come back to it. And that is that the Parks Commission has their agenda set and the comments from the surveys online now. So you can view those, but really appreciate you all tuning in right now to learn more about the history of Goerke Park and why we're having this presentation. So May is Historic Preservation Month, and so it's a time to reflect on the physical spaces that connect us to our past. This will only be one of some Historic Preservation Month program that we have. We're going to be announcing more here probably early next week for an exciting series on historic preservation that we're going to kick off by the end of the month. This is more of a one-off presentation because of what you see here in the inlay, and I'm going to make that bigger right now. This was announced about a month ago by the City of Stevens Point, the Parks Department. And this is a master plan draft for Goerke Park. And the important thing to remember is that this is a draft. This isn't finalized yet. And so there have been different public commenting times. There was a survey that was put out. And we'll talk about those survey results in a bit. But you'll notice on here, there's a lot happening, and there's a lot of good stuff on here, and there's some stuff that's concerning to us as a historic preservation organization. So up near the top of the screen, you see number 17. That is where today the former Stevens Point Armory building is. And that dates back to 1921. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. And then if you go down towards the bottom of the screen, next to the big dome thing, is number 12. And that's would be where the Emma Parker Memorial Field House is today, or commonly known as the Warming House. So those are both historic buildings. The field house / warming house dates back to 1934 and is a New Deal era project. Everything pretty much in this block has some connection to the New Deal, and we'll talk about what that is, because that phrase gets thrown around a lot. But we're just discussing these concerns, and like I said, we have an update on these proposed changes. We have been in conversation with the city's Parks Department about our concerns, and they've been very receptive to that too. So before we end tonight, we're going to talk about what the update is too. But I want to give everybody kind of a feeling of how we got to this point and what the historical significance is of the buildings at Goerke Park, because it's one of those things that we live so often, because we're there a lot, that we might not realize what's around us. And before we get all the way to demolition, what I hope this whole process and conversation brings about is a conversation before we get there. So instead of starting with demolition, let's figure out how we can use these buildings first and how we can retrofit them to fit our modern way of life, even though these buildings are, 90 to 100 or over 100 years old in some cases. So that's really important. So just keep this in mind, that this is kind of what spurred this on, but this is not the end of the conversation. There's still a chance for us to make a difference in historic preservation, especially this being May Historic Preservation Month. So let's go back to the beginning. This is what's known as a Sanborn fire insurance map. This one's actually from the early 1920s. This had the best graphic for a presentation like this. So Sanborn Fire Insurance Company, they sold fire insurance, and so they would assess municipalities' structures for risk. So you can get some pretty detailed things from looking at Sanborn fire insurance maps at different points in time, knowing exactly what was there. If it's an industrial facility, it gets really in depth. But you'll see the kind of where that big number 3 is, that street right there, that's Michigan Avenue. And then where that racetrack is, just south of that, that is Main Street. That is the site of P.J. Jacobs and Goerke Park, and basically that whole block. That's what it looked like in 1922. And so you can see that things have changed quite a bit over time. There's pretty much nothing to the east of there. That cemetery on the right part of the screen, that's Guardian Angel. That's the start of Guardian Angel Cemetery. And so things have really evolved, and the city's kind of grown up around this site being something of a recreational site, an educational site, a military site as well, having the armory there. So let's talk more about the fairgrounds. So it's kind of funny to consider. We don't think of that as having any sort of purpose other than being a school building and a football field and ice skating rink and whatnot today. But that was the Stevens Point Fairgrounds, opening in 1885. And as is evidenced by this postcard that we have in our collections, horse racing was the major draw to the fair for most of its existence. In 1886, the second year of the fair being open, a horse named Flossie G from Janesville was brought up and set a track record of less than 2 minutes and 20 seconds around the track that was never broken. And in these days of the fair, especially in the 1800s and early 1900s, the common daily attendance of the fair was over 20,000 people. And you think about that now, as the city of Stevens Point proper is what, 25,000 people? And it was not nearly as big then. So spectators from all over the region would come for these horse races and the exhibitions that they would have at the fair. Later, and this seems just downright dangerous, but they had motorcycle races at the fair, which is fun. That guy, it's hard to see on the kind of, this is a little more blown up. The second guy from the right has a Harley Davidson sweatshirt in. So, you know, being a strong roots in Wisconsin company there, it would have been quite the scene to see motorcycles flying around that track. It also would have been pretty loud. Here's a better look at the fair. This is getting into the later 19-teens, maybe early 1920. I'd say 1920 is when this came from. And again, pardon the quality. It's a little pixelated when it's blown up. But you can see the racetrack. You can see all the spectators. And then you can see there's that on the left, there's that exhibition building that would have had different attractions in it during the fair. So this really was a big deal. And you might be thinking, well, what happened to the fair? I want to go back to that. In 1928 was the last year that the fairgrounds were actually used as a fairground. And by 1930, the exposition buildings and the grandstand were torn down. And what you saw to the north of that then, as of 1921, so the last years of the fair's existence in Stevens Point, was the Stevens Point Armory. So this is back to one of those fire insurance maps. So you can see the fairgrounds are on the southern part of it, with the grandstand there listed out. And there's the Stevens Point Armory there. And so this housed basically the Stevens Point National Guard, the 120th Field Artillery Unit of the 32nd Division. And so the great thing about the detail of these maps is you can see what the different portions of the building were used for. And so the western portion was the officers' quarters and locker rooms. The southeastern portion was the artillery equipment that they would have been training with and using. And then to the north is the stables. I said steeples. I meant stables. So stables were up there. And you're thinking 1921, why are there stables? Well, they still did some training for field artillery with horses in 1921, which is crazy to think about, because they just got through World War I, and I don't think horses fared too well during that conflict. But the center part, the kind of raised rotunda area, which still exists as a rec center today in the Parks Department, that was a place that was actually a stock sales area. So during the fair, that would be where livestock was actually shown and sold. And so the stables were used not only for the military purposes of it, but then also for during the fair. And now you might be also questioning the design of this building. Well, according to the newspapers, the reason for the different wings was one, if you're an officer, do you really want your office right next to stables? They're might have been quite the smell for that. So that was one thing. Also, would you really want to have a lot of people near all of your live artillery and your munitions? So all of this was basically a fireproofing plan so that people could, if there was a fire, you could cut it off on one of the wings. So that's why it was designed that way. Here's one of the earliest pictures we have of the armory from the 1920s. You can see there's not a whole lot around it. And again, this is the current Parks Department building. And so it's not a whole lot's changed in the design of it. Obviously, the function has changed by a lot. But you can see in the rotunda there, those are actually windows to let light in. To cut down on electricity costs and such. But to the left there, that's the current Parks Department. To the right, that's storage for the Forestry Department for the city nowadays. So the 120th Field Artillery was based out of there. And really, it was, kind of used sparingly. Yes, there was the 120th Field Artillery out of there. But they didn't really start to do a whole lot there until the years leading up to World War II, when the international conflicts started to arise. They started to really amass a lot more troops on a regular basis there and keep it functioning. And so we have this wonderful photo collection of these from the Stevens Point Journal. And so we have these great photos of the troops in the years leading up to World War II in this wonderful historic structure that we're so lucky to still have. Here we can get kind of a view of one of the wings, the southwestern wing of the building behind the troops getting assembled outside of the front of the building there. And here it kind of brings emotions out at me that we had, sending people off to war. So this is a picture of the troops with their families saying goodbye as they were getting deployed before World War II outside of the armory. Because the newspaper went inside buildings too, and a lot of buildings only have pictures of the outside. So we're lucky we have this collection that lets us inside buildings during different time periods. So this is the late 1930s, maybe around 1940. This is the 120th Field Artillery assembling inside what's now the rec center. You can see there's a basketball hoop in the background. So there was still recreation happening in that building for a long, long time. But after it ceased to be a horse showing area and training area like that, it was used for troop training. And different things to do with the guard. And here's one of the superior officers came to do an inspection. And so you see the background of the building. This building was in high use at this point, getting ready for what became World War II. It was also a social center. There was a lot of space in there. I believe there's still a small stage in there too. But they built this in as a community center. So this was not just the National Guard. This was meant to be used for the entire community. And it's, still being used in a lot of ways that way today through the Parks Department. And so this is 1936. This is a benefit ball that would have been held with a big band in this space to help infantile paralysis in honor of President Franklin Roosevelt's birthday. So that would have probably been a very big and fun occasion to go take part in a very social cause in Stevens Point in 1936. And they brought in wrestling at the armory too. So you could have gone there for 75 cents. You could have sat ringside. What a time to be alive, to be going to see a wrestling match at the Stevens Point Armory. I don't think the Stevens Point Parks Department will bring that back anytime soon. But that would have been a neat thing to see there. I'll go back real quick. The armory is largely separate in the history from Goerke Park. It gets combined, through who owns it later. But the reason it's called Goerke Park has to do first with this guy who's got a business right here. We're not exactly sure where this was. We're not exactly sure where August Goerke's store was. He was a tailor, as you see here. His first store was on the northwestern corner of the square. Those buildings aren't around anymore. They kind of mashed the brick buildings in, and there was some wood frame buildings. We're not sure if that was one of the ones that got torn down. He later moved to the site that's now where Jim Lobb's Music is downtown. That was the Citizens Bank building. And before that, there was a building there that was August Goerke's store. So more than likely, August Goerke's store does not exist anymore. But August Goerke was married to a woman named Amanda Beaufort. And she was born in New Orleans. And after the Civil War, she moved north and married this August Goerke fellow in Chicago. And unfortunately, in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, Amanda sustained injuries that would leave her largely homebound for the rest of her life. And I want to thank one of our wonderful partners and cemetery tour guides for us as an organization, Jen Berlowski, for a lot of this biographical information on Amanda Goerke. But Amanda Goerke and August, they lost everything in that Chicago fire. And then, like I said, she was injured and homebound for most of her life after that. They moved to a small town in Minnesota called Sleepy Eye, and then to Stevens Point after they lost two of their sons in Minnesota. A very tragic life that the Goerke family lived. But when they moved to Stevens Point, August ran a successful tailoring business here. And after his death in 1911, Amanda became very much reclusive in mourning, even more so than she was with her injuries. She barely left the house. But she also used the somewhat formidable fortune that August had amassed through his business to continue making different donations to charitable causes. Unfortunately, and this is where it gets very, very sad, is Amanda Goerke died by suicide in 1922 on her 70th birthday. And in her will, she left $10,000 to the city of Stevens Point for recreational purposes. It was an interesting thing that up until not really too long ago, we're talking, 1960s, that people would die and bequest money to their municipality for projects. Which, what a great thing to do. It's not something you often hear about nowadays. It happens occasionally to fundraise for certain projects, but usually, this is before the modern kind of fundraising and foundation and different philanthropic mechanisms that we have today. The philanthropic nonprofit industry was pretty younger in those days and not as sophisticated. So she left $10,000 to the city of Stevens Point. This is the monument for the Goerke family. She built this for her husband, and then of course she's buried there now too. It's the largest monument in Portage County. It's massive. It's at Forest Cemetery, which, if you're not familiar, is you can enter off Patch Street from the north, and then from the west off of Church Street. There's an entrance with some gates kind of south of the movie theater, and it is many, many tons. It's massive. So if you go in the cemetery, go to the south end, and I promise you will not be able to miss the Goerke Monument. So the city of Stevens Point, after Amanda dies, has this sum of money. $10,000 was not nothing in those days. And so what are you going to do with it? Well, the city of Stevens Point had it held in a fund, and basically started to earmark it for this park. And so when they tore down the fairgrounds in 1930, they knew what they were going to do with it. In 1929, though, the stock market crashes and the nation is plunged into a Great Depression. And by 1932, in that presidential election, voters were very fed up with Herbert Hoover's lack of a response to the economic upheaval. And so they elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt as president. And when he came into office in the spring of 1933, the unemployment nationally was 25%, which was like 12 million people were out of work in 1933. And so he got to work, expanding the federal government in ways that we've never seen before, and in ways that still affect us to this day. And there's actually two different New Deals, is what he called them. So in his acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1932, he pledged a New Deal for the American people. And so all of the programs that his administration did in the 1930s to combat the Great Depression were largely known as New Deal era programs. And so that's where a lot of these different abbreviations come in, and they called it alphabet soup. Some of the people did who are mainly critics of it. But they were, the NRA was the National Recovery Association. The CCC was the Civilian Conservation Corps, PWA, Public Works Administration. And so these are some political cartoons from the period, kind of poking fun or being critical of Franklin Roosevelt for all these different programs that he was kind of inventing to expand the federal government to combat the Great Depression. So that plays largely into the stories of the structures at Goerke Park. The first structure we're going to talk about is the Parker Memorial Fieldhouse. So in 1932, the city designated the old fairgrounds for recreation, education, and military use. What a combination of things. Basically, the military use was there because of the armory being on the north side of the site. but because they had started playing football there in 1932, they needed locker rooms and they needed facilities for the coaches to work out of and for equipment to be stored. And so they had a field house constructed in 1934 using CWA labor. That's Civil Works Administration is that New Deal program. So it's not a WPA. WPA kind of becomes the catch-all for all New Deal stuff. And really, that's just one of the programs that built a lot of things. But really, in the harsh winter of unemployment in 1933 to 1934, as all these New Deal programs are getting started, the CWA was really one of the first ones to put people to work. And it was a temporary program. It only lasted till into 1934. And really, having a building that is a CWA building in Stevens Point is pretty unique. You see a lot of WPA, which means Work Progress Administration, and that's what pretty much the rest of the structures at Goerke Park are. But a CWA building, that ought to be recognized much more as a local landmark because there are not many of those across the country, really. Lost my train of thought all of a sudden. So they needed to fund this building. So first off, to get the building, the labor was provided by the CWA. Laura May Corrigan, who was a Stevens Point native, and she married a very wealthy man, a steel magnate in Chicago. She became an international socialite and worth a lot of money. So you can see on the bottom part of that newspaper clipping there, her fortune amassed over $30 million at one point. Well, when her mother died, she decided that the city of Stevens Point could use $1,000 to build this memorial field house in honor of her mother. And so that's a picture of Laura May Corrigan. When she died with her massive fortune in the 1940s, she left no money to the people of Stevens Point. But we got her money for that, for the field house. Here is the program we have in our collections. The Parker, this is when they dedicated the field house after it was completed, again, using that CWA labor, May 29th, 1934. Again, I love how they tout that these are fireproof construction. And so here we have the inside of the program. This is what took place. You see on the right side, it says speedball demonstration by the girls' gym class, which had to be interesting. And there was a parade going on that day, different demonstrations. I have to look up. I'm not sure what kitten ball is. But then they had a baseball game with Rapids versus Point to top off the whole opening of this great new facility for the people of Stevens Point. Here's some images from the early days. One of them from the early days of the field house being there, and it served the skating rinks because outdoor hockey was the name of the game for Stevens Point High School hockey until 1980. But love how the guys are dressed in hats and coats to go ice skating. And it's a very social affair for people to be out ice skating. And it's kind of familiar, right? We still have ice skating on that site there today. Here's much later. This is 1970s, but you can see the neighborhood's grown up a lot over the years, and people parked and ready to utilize the facilities provided by that Parker Memorial Fieldhouse there. This is from our Stevens Point Journal collection. This is the Stevens Point Hockey Club taking on Mosinee in 1948. This would have been a newspaper photo. A wonderful photo of a girl laughing at her kid brother for falling and hurting himself, as a tradition as old as time. Football was also based out of there because Goerke Field was right next door. And so this is the 1948 Stevens Point High School football team, just the football team, right outside of their training facility at the Parker Memorial Fieldhouse. And here's the coach, John Roberts, in the equipment room. Look at all those great helmets. The newspaper article said he spent the summer painting them silver to make them more intimidating or something like that. So that when they took the field, that's where they that's how they presented themselves. And of course, Goerke Park, or Goerke Field rather, the football field that all of us are so familiar with, of seeing both the Spash as well as UWSP games played at. That's still such a great community asset. That was added in 1938 was when that started getting construction. The Works Progress Administration funded that. And built that construction of that football stadium. It opened in 1940, and it's been used for more than just football too. So this is a photo of a National Guard ceremony happening there. There were different religious ceremonies we have pictures of as well, and of course all the sports and track and field events surrounding it as well. So it's really quite the complex that's been so vibrant there. And the Armory did not escape the New Deal either. In 1938, the National Guard, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, also made updates to the Armory building as well. So technically, that could be considered partially a New Deal property. I do love how Stevens Point was emblazoned across the roof of the wings. That's something I cannot find when they covered that up, and I wonder if it's under the current roofing or something like that. Would be a fun thing to bring back if we had the opportunity, though, wouldn't it? So here is 1940. So you have the site has started to build up, right? You have the football field up in the top right, hockey rinks below that with the Parker Fieldhouse. P.J. Jacobs was built in 1937 and opened in 1938. And then at the top of the screen, you also have the Armory still functioning in that purpose for the 120th Field Artillery. And you'll notice that the neighborhoods are actually kind of sparse. Not a lot hasn't filled in, and really north of there's not a lot either on what was known as Jordan Road and now is Stanley Street. But basically, this is what it looked like. And then in 1950, the late 1950s, they put the pool in that is there now. And so that's crazy that dates back that far. But that is now named the Donald Copps Memorial Pool. Don Copps was the civic leader and a member of the Copps family who had the grocery stores. But he was the one who fundraised for the project to get the pool put in. And you'll notice right in the background of that photo is the rotunda of the Armory. So again, everything's very interconnected and relatable on this site. So here is 1974. So we're going years ahead at this point, looking at that site. And you can see that the neighborhood has really grown up around these facilities. You have a neighborhood that takes advantage of it, and the whole community does too, because through having the Armory there, that then became a rec center after the National Guard left in 1955 to their current facility on Jefferson. You have the skating rinks with the warming house, of course, the football stadium, and the big anchor of P.J. Jacobs High School. And so you have kind of this like moment captured in time there that's really unique of different eras of architecture on Stevens Point, and really kind of, if you had to encapsulate the New Deal in Stevens Point, there's a great example of several different properties that all were affected by that huge moment in our collective national history that we can point to. Things change, though. Things evolve. And we know this as a historical society and as historical preservationists, things need to change and adapt. And so, the field house became the home of the city of Stevens Point, Parks and Recreation and Forestry Departments. And this is before they did some renovations on that. So now the 120th Field Artillery on the rotunda, that's covered up by siding. As you can see, it's not in great shape there. So we're glad that building was preserved and updated for current use, so that we're keeping this part of our built environment as part of our story. That's really important, because when you lose that, you can't get it back. And what replaces it, who knows how long that's going to be around. So you want to make sure that we're being very intentional with how we approach what we keep and what we don't in city planning. This is in the early 2000s. This is, a great pastime of Goerke Park is the outdoor ice skating in the winter. Now that by that time it's the warming house and less used as locker rooms. And then this is 1998 Santa. There was Santa's Workshop in 1998. So that's another great community thing that they did with ice skating, is they had Santa come by to augment that experience, which is wonderful. And of course, even Goerke Field has been updated over the years. That's one of the additions of the press boxes. And we love that things get added to, so that we're keeping historical structures in use. and keeping them as a fabric of our community. And so, Goerke Park has served generations of our residents for football, swimming, skating, community events, and it continues to be this vibrant public space. So back to this redesign plan and how we think that historic preservation ought to be thought of first rather than last. We would hope, and we've talked, again, we're in conversation with Dan Kramer, who's really done a great job in the Parks Department of historic preservation. They preserve numerous historic properties across the city. Iverson Park and Buchholz Park have wonderful New Deal era buildings that are in use and remain a vibrant part of our community. What we ask is a conversation with the community, with city leaders on how we can make these properties that I've covered in this presentation still live into the future. If the warming house isn't being used, let's have a conversation about how that park or how that portion of Goerke Park can exist into the future. If the armory needs to find new life, let's figure that out. Once you start tearing buildings down and putting new construction, one, you're not being environmentally friendly. Just bottom line, new construction is way more expensive than retrofitting an older building. So you have that to contend with, and newer buildings are not built with the hardy materials that these buildings. I mean, these buildings have lasted 90, 100 years for a reason, right? And you're changing the fabric of our community. So we need to be really careful anytime we're going to do that. So again, this was the drafted plan that's from about a month ago. Here's where we're at right now. This is a victory at the moment. Let's see if we can keep it that way. And I'll get my face off of the screen here too. So right now, this just went live today, and I posted it in the comments of this stream here. So you should be able to access them at the top. Stevens Point put out all of the comments that you all submitted. Great job if you did that. And thank you for anybody who submitted and made their voice heard, no matter what their viewpoint is. We want more people to be involved in these processes as a community. I think that's wonderful. The number one theme that came across was the support for preserving historic buildings and the community gym space, which is in the former Armory building. How wonderful. So this is what is being presented as a recommendation to the Parks Commission. They meet on May 7th. And so you'll notice that the staff recommendation from the Parks Department says retain both the Parker Building and the Recreation Center / Armory in their current locations in the next master plan draft. Meaning, if this gets into the next draft, we will have a wonderful historic preservation victory on our hands. The next step is how we use those buildings and how we keep them relevant in our community. But this is a great start to having those conversations, because once they're gone, you can't have those conversations anymore. So here's what's next. First, there's a Parks Commission's meeting on May 7th, the details of which you can find in the link there with the agenda. So you can go to that. It's open to the public. I'm going to be there. You can go and observe or make your voice heard during public comment periods. Watch the deliberations about what's being decided about what's happening in your community. So that's number one. Number two is this is not a final plan. And so the process is it'll go to the Parks Commission, and ultimately the Parks Commission approves the draft of the plan. It goes to Common Council for the city of Stevens Point. If you are a Stevens Point resident or stakeholder, I would recommend you reach out to your alder to have these conversations, because they work for you. They're your elected official. And so make sure that you are reaching out to them to let them know that you care about historic preservation in this community. And if ultimately these buildings, the Armory and the Parker Building, are preserved in the next draft of the plan, we want to be shouting from the rooftops our support for this plan. We want to make sure that we're going forward with a plan that preserves these structures, so that we can have these conversations in the future about how to best fit them into our world today. So with that, I will stick around for just a minute if you have any questions. I see Chelsea Piffner's been rather active in the comments. Good to see you here, Chelsea. She did say that Goerke's Tailor Shop was now near Union by the post office. That's not the evidence that we found based on the address and the renumbering guide from 1965, but we can have that conversation about where that is. I would love to lock down where Goerke's Tailor Shop was. Absolutely. But if anybody has any questions or comments, Chelsea's got a great quote here. Historic preservation is not about the past. It's about building a better future together. from the Chief Preservation Officer from the National Trust of Historic Preservation. And again, this is your time to comment or be heard. So with that, let's move into May as Historic Preservation Month together. And you can always reach out to the Portage County Historical Society and let us know other issues in the community, historic preservation wide, as well as how we can include our history going forward. So thank you for tuning in. This stream will be saved too, so you can share it with as many people as you want. But have a great Historic Preservation Month, and we hope to see you at one of our events again soon. See ya.